Can you say hard hats, folks? Hard hats, lunch pails, steel-toe boots.
Anything short of a championship this year is a failure. Look at this boomer right here.
You've just got so much talent here.
Somebody said we need to apologize for Jalen.
Can I quote it, John? What are we apologizing for? What did we say? What did we do? Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome into a September edition of the Garden Report as we inch closer to training camp. Not a ton to talk about, not a ton of news rolling yet. So I decided this was a good week to throw together a top 100 list. And I actually like how it came out. Noa Dalzell here, SB Nation, CLNS Media, You Got Boston podcast. I actually wrote through this pretty easily, Noah. And, there's going to be, I'm sure, some rankings here that people don't love. But I actually think the Celtics fared pretty well in this list I made. And they are all pretty well represented here. I think in the end I had 6 Celtics on the list here. So their top 6 in its entirety makes it. And we'll start with some of our sponsor here. Prize Picks. Got football, tons of football going on this weekend. So it's the perfect time to go over to Prize Picks. And all the sports are going to be starting up again soon. But right now, football, the focus, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app, that's Prize Picks. With 5 million active users, it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Caleb Williams, this is a big one for week 1 here. Passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. All you need is 1 yard from Caleb Williams, and that gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free wins. Don't miss out on other deals on Prize Picks. You can win up to 100 times your money over there with as little as 4 correct picks. It's the best way to get in on the action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and right here. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS. Get $50 off instantly, or get $50 rather instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need a win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Again, use that code CLNS to support the Garden Report here and CLNS. So let's get into the list, Noah. We have 100 names here and we don't have all night, so we'll just run through them loosely. Look at some of the highlights here. I love DiVincenzo at 100 because I thought he just had such a fun year, and I love that he makes this list here. One of many Knicks on the list too, which I found interesting that I was able to squeeze in here. But let's go right past Keegan Murray to our guy Al Horford. Still in the top 100. Still playing championship level defense, and still able to log huge minutes throughout that postseason run for the Celtics. He's turned 38 this year. The seasons keep rattling off. You're wondering when he's going to slow down. I would imagine coming out of the regular season, he won't be on this list. But given what he did last year with the 40% three-point shooting during the regular season, his defensive versatility, and then effectively being the team's starting center on the championship run, I felt like he had to squeeze in here somewhere. Do you agree?
I mean, I'm always privy to having Al Horford in the top 100. I feel like he belongs. The thing with the ranking list is, and I haven't made one of these, and I don't know that I'd be able to, is that it's just so hard to compare because it's like, are you saying right now who's literally a more valuable player? Like, I'd be curious to hear, Bobby, as you assembled this list, like what your criteria was. Like, what is Al Horford being one ahead of Keegan Murray? Do you think he's more valuable to have on a team right now? Would you rather have him in a singular game? Like, obviously it's positionless, so that makes things more complicated, but I feel like that's where I struggle to even know like what exactly the order is based off of. So maybe you can start there with some of your perspective on it, and then
so a lot of it came down to the advanced stats leaders, and we'll get to some of the other guys who might have taken a hit there. I think that's always where I'm going to start. Then I go to shooting. I think shooting's so valuable in the league now that it's going to be tough to make this list or rank high on this list if you're not a good shooter. And Horford obviously brings that to the table. And then I go defense. You're going to take a big hit if you're not as good of a defender. And then, I'll start to consider like roles, how much of a weight a guy's carrying. So a lot of it is just from having watched these guys last year. And then the other half of it is the numbers. So a lot of it is going to be based off the numbers from last year. A lot of it's going to be based on how much work these guys have to do, how big of a role these guys have, versatility. And then the big thing with this list is I'm pointing it forward. So you see quite a few spots up from Al Horford, Herb Jones, Sexton, who I thought had a pretty underrated year, Murphy, who I love, Kuminga, who I think is going to have a bigger role this year, take a step, Kuzma, who's fine. Mark Williams, who didn't play much last year, but I think is going to be awesome this year. Hart, Duran, another young guy. The only rookie I included was Reed Shepherd. Because, again, not going off anything he did last year, obviously. I think he's just going to be awesome. I think he's going to have a ton of opportunity in Houston. Loved what we saw from him at Summer League. So I think he's going to jump right into this list right away, given what kind of weight he's going to have to carry there in Houston. So it's a mixed bag. Some of these guys are here because of great seasons last year. Another guy a few spots up who didn't have an amazing season last year, but I think is going to bounce back is Josh Giddey in Chicago with the role he's going to have. So it's a mix. Considered a lot of different things here. Some of these guys are here because they've had good careers. They've had good handful of seasons before this, and they might fall out. I'm looking at Zach LaVine. We'll see how this year goes for him. But, yeah, I think I started with the advanced stats. Shooting, critical for this list. And then I think how big of a role you have in defense are important from there. So you could argue Horford shouldn't be here. I think some of the guys I left off, like Malik Monk, is probably a slam dunk. 6-man guy if he didn't get hurt last year. Fred VanVleet had a pretty good year, especially numbers-wise, but aging, maybe taking a step back with the shooting and stuff like that. And Mike Conley, another guy who was probably top 100 last year that I don't have on the list. Brogdon would have been a slam dunk on this list in the past, but I think he's just getting a little bit older. And then, there were some like rising guys like Santi Aldama, Anthony Simons, who had a tough time keeping off this list. Jaime Jaquez, too, who I think is awesome. Podzinski, Keontae George. So, like, there could be a lot. You know how it goes, Noah. There's a lot of young guys every year who end up taking massive steps very fast, and then the old guys drop right off. So, like I said, I'm giving Horford credit for what he did last year, but I'd have to imagine, especially with minute limits and all the rest, the management they're going to do this year, he's probably not going to be on this list at the end of the year.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think like just looking at this, like a guy who I really like, but I could see being hurt by like the shooting analytics is like a Josh Hart. Like I would think he's probably more valuable than like a Tyler Hero as far as this goes. As far as like who would I rather have on my team if I could sign one, but yeah, I can imagine with like the advanced analytics from a shooting standpoint, he'd probably take a massive hit. But I think Al seems about right at 98. If nothing else, like he does have history on his side as far as a lot of these guys is like what their ceilings might look like, and Al's more proven than some other people that maybe you left off. And we know that he's contributed to winning basketball. And I mean, think about some of the big games that he had in the playoffs. Like it's not just 5 years ago that we're referencing, but it's like literally a few months ago what he was able to do.
Is Marcus Smart, who I had at 76 here, still a top 100 player looking forward? What he's going to be in Memphis, injuries, maybe some slippage in his game as he gets a little bit older here. Do you think he'll stay on this list throughout the year?
I mean, I think the Marcus Smart that we last saw like really playing full-time basketball was in 2023. And yes, I think he was, at least a top 75 player. I do have some Marcus Smart bias. I'm not going to deny it, but I think that he was there. The problem is that this past year, like he was really a non-factor. It's almost like he was on hiatus for the entire season, like because he had all those injuries. I feel like he had some big moments and some big games, but they were few and far between, like very significant, injuries. So I have no idea like what Marcus Smart we're getting next year. If we're going to get a guy who is pretty much the guy that we remembered, from a couple years back, or a guy who has just kind of continued to show signs of wear and tear just because of his style of play. I hope that he looks like the same player that we last saw in Boston. But I could see, we knew that this was, the way that he plays is that he's going to have he's going to have a little bit of a negative impact there.
Yeah, and I love as I started to get higher on this list, how the groups of guys here have some similarities, like 70 to 80. I think a lot of them are secondary ball handlers. Some of them are getting used to new homes or could be going to new homes soon, in Levine's case. Guys who aren't number ones on their team, but are ball handlers and that are pretty important in terms of having their team take a step this year. They're just crucial supporting cast characters here. And then when you get into the 60s, a little bit more differentiation here, but still some secondary guys who are going to be pretty important for their team's success going forward. Suggs, I loved last year, finally. Looked like the player that he could become. I'm pretty high on him in Orlando. Wagner took a real step back this year. He probably would have been higher coming out of last year than this year with the shooting drop-off that he had. Green, another tough guy to rate. He could just massively sink here given his aging and the offensive drop-off from him, but still pretty great defender. And then when you get into the 50s, it's like the rock defenders, OG, Alex Caruso, who's in Oklahoma City now. Jalen Williams had a pretty big impact in that area last year. And then some guys falling like Chris Middleton, DeMar DeRozan, who used to be engines. Some guys like Cade Cunningham, who I hope can start to rise up this list pretty quickly here among the younger players. So it's an interesting mix. We'll get into the top 50 here in a minute, but does anything else stand out to you from 50 to 100 here?
I think it just makes you realize how deep the league is, honestly. Like the fact that this is 50 to 100, there is just a lot of very impactful players here. And even someone like Cade Cunningham, who hasn't really been a part of winning, like he's a guy that can go for 40, right? He's a guy that was really like the only bright spot on that Pistons team. So even just thinking that I tend to agree with you. I think he's probably not a top 50 player based on what we've seen so far, but I think he will be and he should be if everything kind of goes according to plan. So yeah, I think my biggest takeaway, just looking at what you came up with here between 51 to 100, is just how deep the league is, and just thinking about like expansion. It's like if this is, if top 100 is like the top third of the league, like I think there's just so much talent in that space. I don't know, Draymond Green. I feel like maybe you were a little generous on him. That's like one guy that stood out.
How low would you have him?
Else. I don't know.
Closer to 70?
Probably, yeah. I feel like I'd have to go through the exercise to be like, what am I sacrificing here? But I'm just looking at some of the guys below him, and I'm like, okay, DeAndre Ayton, you were a little high on too, honestly.
I am high on Ayton still. He was great last year, and this is tough too. Good stats, bad team kind of thing. I'm always gonna be stuck on the 2021 Ayton, who was switching, who was critical on a finals team, and has developed this mid-range game too. I think it was the Portland game in Boston last year, right? Where he was just draining mid-range after mid-range after mid-range. And I'm like, this guy's so talented. And then there's the negative side of him that maybe doesn't have the best motor, isn't the most consistent, injuries here or there. I've always loved Ayton. He might be stuck in Portland and might never play for a winner again, especially with his salary. But he quietly had a pretty effective year last year, I thought.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is really hard with the players that are on losing teams. It's like, how do you evaluate that? Especially when you look at guys that didn't have the most gaudy stats, but really contributed to winning. It's like, that's kind of like the flaw of the player ranking system is like, is it guys that are able to do their role really well, or is it guys that are able to produce really well? Somebody else I feel like maybe could be a little bit higher is CJ McCollum.
Yep.
Just looking at, he's just a little bit more proven than some of the guys above him.
Yeah, Porter I didn't feel great about shooting though still. He's such a great shooter that I think that buoys him a little bit. Turner, I'm not the
really can
biggest
be a
fan
limited
of.
player though. Like
Yeah,
Michael
you
Porter
can.
Jr. can be, when he's just being that, like what we've seen at points where he's just getting shots up and he's not contributing kind of in all facets. Like he is a more limited player, and I feel like we haven't seen his shooting come to fruition like for an extended period of time the way that some of these other guys have. Like he struggled really through that playoff run when they did win the championship a year ago. So But there's things about him. I keep thinking about this from we're not looking at prospects here, right? Because that would be obviously a different list if we were thinking about where guys are going to go.
Well, that's part of it. Again, I have Shepard on here.
Yeah.
I like where Kuminga's going. I liked how Kobe White, even Jalen Green, who I'm not the biggest fan of, ended last year great. Jalen Johnson, I think, is going to become more of a focal point next year. He had a big injury midway through last year. And Murphy, who started last year, injured. So I think all of those guys are risers on this list. Even Keegan Murray, who might not have the highest upside, I squeezed him in because I think he can take some steps out there, and he needs to for that Kings team to get where they want to. So a lot of this is forward facing in my mind. And some of these guys aren't going to be here as they get older, as young guys come in and make some noise. The only rookie I had on here, again, was Shepard. I think it's possible he's the only guy here at the end of the year, if he even makes it, given what this class looks like. But sometimes multiple rookies surprise you. Castle, could he get on here? Do one of the top two guys there pop?
Just looking at positions, you have, I would switch Isaiah Hardenstein and Brook Lopez at this point. I'd rather have Isaiah Hardenstein on my team. I think he can impact.
Yeah, I wanted to rank him very high, but again, it was 1 year, and I'm like, all right, let me stay conservative with this. But he was unreal last year, and I love what he can do.
Right, if you're thinking forget long term, right? Because that's not the point here. But for one season, you can sign one or the other. I think you take Isaiah. I think he's a more impactful player at this point.
It's close. Lopez was still a 36 guy from 30 last year. Just won defensive player of the year a couple of years ago. So I think Hartenstein probably was better last year. But looking forward, I'll still take Lopez for this year probably. But that might be wrong. We'll see. Let's get into the higher portions of this list. First, I want to give a shout out to Game Time. It's still that time of year, summer events going on, baseball in action as well. But football is here. Sunday, you got the Patriots. You have college football throughout the weekend. So there's a ton going on this weekend right now. And Game Time has a new feature right now. Again, my favorite app to find tickets for everything. That makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There's all kinds of great features on Game Time like that. The super deal, seat views before you buy. That's a big one, especially if you're going somewhere you've never seen before. And they have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, all of that and more, all in pricing, Game Time ticket coverage, all that and more, again, over at the Game Time app. So go download it today. Download the app, create an account, and use CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. That's code CLNS over on Game Time. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Been using them all summer for a bunch of different events and sports. And there's more to come this fall. I'm looking for some Syracuse tickets soon enough. Go back up to campus, see how the football team's doing. As they could try to go 2-0 tomorrow. So we'll have more on that. And the Patriots, as they play in Cincinnati this weekend, make sure to tune into Patriots Press Pass for all the coverage over there this weekend. Let's continue through our list here. 50-41. Here we go. Any Celtics in here? Yes, there are. 50, I got Murray. 49 off a modest season. Didn't take quite the leap. I'm sure some people thought he would. Scotty Barnes. LaMelo Ball, who I'm higher on than most, I feel like, even after a couple injured seasons. Mikal Bridges, who I think is going to slide nicely into a secondary role. Again, there in New York. Jaren Jackson Jr., who I'm not as high on as others. Brandon Ingram, who's obviously taken a hit here. Julius Randle, who you could argue should be higher, but hurt last year. Probably going to become more of a secondary guy on this Knicks team, given the additions here. Evan Mobley and Jared Allen end up right next to each other, funny enough. And with all these bigs here in the 40s, it's a good look for Kristaps Porzingis, despite the injury coming into this year and his likely lack of availability, that he moves into the top 50 here. That's probably not where he would have been coming off last year. But he just had a monster year, Noah, when he was available. The 3-point shooting came through. The post game was the best of any player in the league. Defensively, he had a real step forward too. I think was one of the best rim percentage defenders in the league last year. So if you're gonna, injuries obviously a factor here. If you're gonna pick a center right now, after some of the elite, this is a guy who can complement your stars if you're a contending team about as well as anyone. That obviously played a big role in Boston's success last year.
Yeah, so I think with Porzingis is that a healthy Porzingis is above a 41. I think you can move him up some of the other bigs that you have on this list. But the injuries, I almost feel like they're inevitable. Like they're obviously you hope that he doesn't have to miss almost the entire playoff run like he did this year. And you hope that he's able to keep things to strains and soreness rather than anything major, which he did experience a couple of those. But yeah, I think it has to impact your ranking. So you probably have them about right. Julius Randle and Brandon Ingram are both interesting because they're both like secondary options. And I'll speak mostly on Julius Randle in particular, but I feel like he's somebody that, a lot of Knicks fans think that the Knicks are better without him, right? Like there's a lot of questions around how effective his points are, if he's an empty calories player. I think this year is going to answer a lot of questions about him because they have a really good roster around him. You take Julius Randle off this Knicks team, and I think they're easily a top 3 seed in the East. So he should be helping that, right? And I'm really curious because I loved what we saw from the Knicks during this playoffs, and obviously he wasn't a part of that. But if he can come in and not disrupt anything that they're doing, but still help, like I would be really, really impressed with what it does at that point. I just don't know if that's going to be the case. I have a feeling that he's going to disappoint. We haven't really seen him been able to mesh that well and still score and produce at a high level and not disrupt kind of the offensive cadence and everything. So he's a tough one.
It's interesting too because it depends what you need. If you need a guy who's going to run your offense and eat innings and carry a ton of weight, which he does or he's done there in New York, he's capable of that. And that allowed him to make 2 All-NBAs. So I'm sure some proponents of him will say that. There's also a lack of positional versatility with him that I think is going to show through this year. If he could play some center for them, that'd be huge given that they lost Hartenstein. But he probably can't or he won't. I don't know which it is, but I'm not as high on him as the average person. Again, playoff struggles, ball stopping, and defense. Porzingis to me showed out as a defender last year. And if you want to put Allen over him, a borderline DPOY guy who's carried an offensive load, who I think took some nice steps as a passer last year too, I'll allow that. Mobley, not as much. I don't think there's enough offense there, even though he is one of the best defenders in the league right now. But he took a nice step in that Celtics series either. So again, these are more groupings than saying one guy's absolutely better over another. But I do feel good about Porzingis atop the list of these guys. Give me him over Jaren Jackson.
Yeah, there's a common thread in this group. This group has a common thread. They're like the same energy. Yeah. It's hard to explain. I feel like it's a lot of guys that have some defensive intangibles and just like raw things about them that make you optimistic, but then it hasn't necessarily come together to fruition the way that it maybe will down the road, or it could at least with what they have to offer. I feel like Jaren Jackson, before FIBA, I had a different view of him, and then watching him in FIBA, like I have not been able to flip the switch on what.
And the fouling, I can't get past it.
Yeah. But again, he's a guy that if you put another big next to him, like that really helps. And so, like a true center. So a lot of these guys, it's like maybe they haven't been in the right position to succeed. I'm lower on LaMelo than you. I haven't seen it personally, but again, a healthy season next year, and if Charlotte starts to win, and I am optimistic about this new coaching staff with Charles Lee and everything that they're putting together, I think it's going to be a new culture. If he's able to lead them to like even like a play-in seed, I think that would help change some of the perspectives around him because he's constantly on like a terrible team, and even some of the big games that he's had, hasn't necessarily always contributed to winning.
Yeah, and he's been hurt a ton the last 2 years. If that continues, he's not a top 50 guy. I like him going into his 23-year-old season, 23 points a game the last 2 years when he was out there, 8 assists, a real stat stuffer, and the defense needs to come along, but again, I emphasize shooting. A guy who can take 9-10 threes a game and hit 37-38% as he's done in the past. I love that skill set of his. I love his size at the point guard spot. And maybe with some better coaching, it's tough because Steve Clifford was a good coach, good defensive coach too, and it just didn't come together under him. But the talent around him on this team continues to get better. I'm pretty high on the Hornets this year. Love Mark Williams. You have Brandon Miller who's taken steps. Miles Bridges is back. Like, I think there's a lot of athleticism on this team. Maybe not the defense you need to be a good team, but the rest of the East is so bad that they could squeeze into 8 easily. And they've played the Celtics tough at different points the last few years. They're actually a mini series early in the schedule that I'm super excited to see. And I won't finish talking about them without shouting out Grant Williams, who I think is a good fit there as well. So I'm high on them, like you are, new coaching staff. But ball is so important. If he's not out there, if he's lackluster, inconsistent, or just one-sided, he's not a top 50 guy. But I believe in him improving with age. His skill set's just unreal. And the numbers he's been able to put up early in his career too. Let's move on to 31-40. And that is where we find Drew Holiday at 35. Above Harden, above Rudy, above Şengün, who's pretty high on this list here after a standout season before the injury. Towns, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but did have a nice postseason that helped them get to the West Finals. Chet Holmgren, who I thought was incredible as a rookie. I think there's some questions about him moving to the 4 if he has to next to Hartenstein, but he hit 37% of his threes last year. And Holiday might be a little high, but he's defending every position, shooting 40% from 3. A ball handler who can facilitate for you. He just does everything. So much respect. Everybody says he's one of the best defenders in the league. It's tough for me to not rank him high here, given the impact he had on the championship team, the versatility of his game, and just how dominant his defense is.
In the Olympics, I think that's just, it kind of showed you what he's capable of when given a bigger opportunity. Even early on when he was a starter, it's like you realize that his offensive game is a lot more versatile, and he has a much deeper back, I think, than people think on a nightly basis, because he just doesn't go into it. But I would actually say, I'm not going to deny my bias here, but I think Holiday at least is in the right spot. But Trae Young, I would probably push back a little bit. Like, I think that some of these guys on this list, 32-40 are more impactful than him. So he's somebody I think you have a little bit too high, just taking defense into account. And he has had some struggles with efficiency at various points, but for the most part, this grouping of 10 is clearly better than the last grouping. So I'm generally with you, but I think you have Holiday around the right spot at 35, and it is kind of remarkable when you look at it, at this point in his career with the relatively modest numbers that he averaged last year. Like, he is still a top 40 impactful player, and I think that he got paid like it, and he was selected to the Olympics like it. So I don't think it's a crazy viewpoint to have. I don't think it's a very Celtics viewpoint. I think it's pretty accurate.
Yeah, and all these guys here have one big bankable skill. For Harden, it's probably the passing at this point. Gobert's post defense is probably the best in the league. Şengün, passing out of that 5 spot, he's as good as anyone there. Short of Jokic. Towns, the 3-point shooting at his position. Holmgren, post defense. Drew, perimeter defense, right up there with anybody. And if you want to say Derek White, Herb Jones, some of the other big perimeter defenders around the league deserve similarly high standing. To me, it's just that 40% 3-point shooting alongside that is so valuable. And if that stays up, he's still in this top 40 range to me. If that drops off, he's probably fallen out of this range at his age. And, we'll see how consistently he plays at this point for them. And again, direction. He's probably pointing down at this point in his career, at least taking a step back, doesn't have to carry a heavy load. So that's why I'll have him behind a Young, Siakam, Murray, Markkanen, even guys who are just carrying such heavy loads for their teams. Holiday doesn't really have to do that anymore. So Markkanen, I'm torn on him. I think he's pretty one-dimensional with the 3-point shooting, but he's so good at it and such a valuable skill. He rebounds too, so I think he's worthy of being top 40. He just got paid like it, certainly. Murray's going to be interesting. Injuries led to him having a horrible finish to last year and then the Olympics. So I had him a little lower than many probably would here, and could
Yeah.
trend lower if that play continues. Siakam, I love, perfect nearly through the playoffs for them. And I'm glad to see it because I think people got a little low on him, and he's still so skilled and growing in many ways. And young, I have to show him some respect. I know people are low on him as anyone, and the defense has certainly crushed Atlanta every year he's been there. He's going to be a tough guy for anyone to build around, but he is one of the best passers in the league. He does stretch the floor far and can hit a good percentage of a high volume of threes. And he's a guy that, just watching Celtics Hawks over the last handful of years in a playoff series there, was able to hurt Boston when he went against them. Probably one of the more effective guys I've seen play against Boston, in my time covering them. So I got to show him a little bit of respect.
Yeah,
If you
that's
want
fair.
to use
He
the
was
defense to
impressive in
drop
that
him,
series. Yeah.
if you want to drop him on the defense, I'm as big of a defensive guy as anyone. You can do that. But 31 felt right to me.
Yeah, I think Jamal Murray gets a lot of flack because he obviously did not have a good Olympic run. I feel like he's a little bit in that Tatum pool of him being on the Olympic team just kind of ended up being a big national headache for him. Maybe not to the same extent, but at the same time where you say, he obviously wasn't efficient and he was in a shooting slump throughout the playoffs. He also had 2 game winners, legitimately won them 2 games. There is something about him that I will never bet against just because we've seen him at the highest level get it done. And I, feel like honestly, when people look back on that, that Nuggets team that won the championship, I almost feel like he's underrated because Jokic was the finals MVP and the conference finals MVP. There wasn't really debate about it, but Jamal Murray put up numbers and accomplished enough to warrant those accolades on a different team. So the question I think is he healthy? And if he is, I do believe that he easily can be a top 30 player. I mean, in a playoff series, I'm still gonna pick him over most of these guys that we've talked about, if not all.
Yeah, and he has the enormous benefit of playing with Jokic, and I think anyone who has that would fly up this list. Bruce Brown probably
Yeah.
makes this list 2 years ago, so I think that helps him a lot
That's a
too. I try
snub.
to take that into account, and I don't want to kill him for that, but I'm considering it against at least some guys who are primary ball handlers on their team, and we can move on to the guys who are just above him, young Siakam. But first, I want to take a quick break to let you know about, back again here in the Garden Report, Nutrafol. Nutrafol right now, again, right now, it's all about managing your hair. Both of us are young now. We don't have to worry too much about hair loss, but you want to prevent it. You don't want it to become an issue and then have to deal with it. You want to get ahead on it. So what's Nutrafol? The #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. Thinning hair is different for men and women, so a one-size-fits-all approach to hair growth doesn't cut it. They have multiple formulas for men and women that are tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, plant-based lifestyle, postpartum, menopause. So you can get what you need at Nutrafol, physician formulated with 100% drug-free ingredients. It supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting key root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism. We all go through that, and it's all through whole body health. So get results you can run your fingers through for a limited time with Nutrafol. They're offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code GARDEN. That's GARDEN. Find out why 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair at Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com. Promo code GARDEN. That's Nutrafol.com. Promo code GARDEN. So shout out to them. Let's move on in our list here to the 20s. And that's where you're going to find Derek White, just ahead of Trae Young, just ahead of Jamal Murray. At 29, after the 2 defensive seasons we've had, that we've seen from him, after the 3-point shooting run he's been on over the last 2 years and into the playoffs. I don't think he dominated in the playoffs, but him moving to point guard, him being a steady hand who could run some sets for them, and him being, one of the best shot blockers at his position, one of the best defenders at his position, had such a ginormous glue effect on this championship team. And a lot of it's going to go beyond the stats. A lot of it's going to go beyond maybe even watching him as much as most people do. Watching him every day, this guy's as impactful as anyone in the league among role players. And if you want to call him the best role player in the NBA, I would have no qualms about it. So the shooting dips down. He's probably not a top 30 guy, but he's a guy who can do a lot with a few touches. We talked about that through the Olympic run. He's a guy that can defend at the highest level. And if you need him to, as we saw in different spots when guys were out, he can score at 20, 30 points off his own creation, off his shooting. So he just brings so much to the table. I think he's such an elite role guy that he needs to be in the top 30, at least coming off last year in the championship and the 2 seasons he just had.
I like him in the top 30. I have my first really strong opinion here. I think Tyrese Maxey is the best player on this list, at least next year. I think he will be.
Okay.
So that's my first hot take. I would rather have him on a team than probably any of those guys. I mean, it's hard. I don't want to bet against Derek White, but between Paul George and him, like thinking about 2 Sixers, like who scares me more from a Celtics perspective? Like it's Tyrese Maxey. I think he made a massive leap heading into this year, and he's probably due for another one. And in those playoffs,
could he be an All-NBA guy next year?
Absolutely. Yeah, I thought that he struggled when Joel Embiid went down because for the first time he was the number 1 option and had all game planning against him and everything. But I think that's going to make him better in the long run, and he's talked about that. And I don't think that would happen again if he was in that position. It was really a kind of a learning curve type thing. But in the playoffs, when Embiid needed him, like he was massive. He had some big shots, he had some big performances, and obviously it wasn't enough. Like that team didn't get it done, but it only made you more optimistic about him. So it's tough. It's a lot of it is recency bias. Like Darren Fox had his moments a year or 2 ago where I thought he was going to really be on the brink of something great. Obviously, Kyrie Irving, there's been moments of his career where he's been the guy, but just coming off the finals, I don't know that I would put Kyrie over some of the guys in this list, but we are getting to a more elite group. I would move Zion down because I think like the way that Porzingis got that injury bump, I think Zion needs it as well. He hasn't been able to be consistently on the court, and even this year, I think people forget like he wasn't able to be there in the end. So he's somebody that I just wouldn't be able to rely on. As good as he did have, I think he had a sneaky good season last year. Under the radar, wasn't really discussed. I almost feel like the NBA and the NBA media has kind of moved on from Zion. So it's like no matter what he does now, it's just kind of going under the radar. But I'd probably bump him down and I'd move Tyrese Maxey up. Those are my two strong opinions. I'd probably move Sabonis down too. I
love Sabonis.
I know.
To me, I think he's just such an engine. You look at the stats, you look at the weight he carries there in Sacramento, how elite all time of an offense he's made them. Probably stepped back a little bit last year, so that's fair. George, to me, the respect I give him is how many threes he can put up and how elite of a percentage he can maintain to that. I think that's so valuable along with wing size. I think he's so perfectly suited to be the third option there in Philly. That's a team we have to take a long look at when it comes to challengers to Boston. When you have 3 guys of that caliber in the top 30 here, because clearly Embiid is too. If those 3 guys are healthy, that team's going to be a load. There's no doubt about it. They have some depth questions. I'm actually seeing some of their people. I forget specifically what outlet. There was some debate in Philly circles. Should Yabusele start? Noah. That doesn't speak well to their depth. In my mind, but wow, the 3 players they have at the top there, if they can stay healthy, are pretty admirable. Love Bam. If you want to put him over Sabonis, I wouldn't mind that. The defense he brings is so transformative, and he said he wants to go get that DPOY. This could be the year he does it, in my mind, especially if there's some campaigning behind him, and he's obviously going to be carrying a heavy weight there in Miami on offense too, so we'll see if he can maintain both of those things. I'm so high on Paolo, I'll admit. he has to take a leap this year, and he took another step last year, but efficiency-wise, it's tough in that offense, but I think he's going to have some better talent around him this year. He can be a top 25 guy, but it's going to take another leap from him on both ends of the court. And then Zion, the reason I have him so high still is when he's out there, when he's healthy, they've been a borderline contender. And that was more 2 years ago. Last year, he actually played a lot, and they weren't as consistent and effective. So if you want to take him a notch down off that, that's fair. But there's been times where he's playing at his best that his presence alone has made them a borderline contender with, a solid supporting cast. There's actually been quite a few Pelicans we've named on this list, and it's still baffling how they're so mediocre every year despite that talent. A lot of it is the injuries. A lot of it's the inconsistency of the lineups and all that. So I won't knock anyone who says Zion's not out there enough. He's not a top 30 player. But when he is out there, he's one of the guys who has just swung his team's fortunes so drastically. But this is going to be a big year for him because I think if it goes the same way it's gone the last couple of years, he could actually be out of there. And who knows who would even want to pick him up at that point, especially with the money he makes. So he's an interesting guy on this list. Lillard, too. Is he starting to trend down for real? The defense was a big problem for that team last year. He was definitely a top 20 guy late there in Portland. He could be out of the top 30 if it's similar to how it went last year for him. Let's move on to the top 20. And people might have some gripes about this, but I had Jalen a little low coming off the Finals MVP, East Finals.
Ew.
But I do have him over Ja, who has some serious questions still. Injury last year, efficiency too. He's, just what I mentioned with Zion. When he's there, the Pelicans have been borderline contenders. When Ja's been there, the Grizzlies are in that class. And when I talked to Noah Eagle last week, he was making sure to emphasize that the Grizzlies are going to be a real deal team with everybody back this year. But I'll be conservative about his ranking. Jimmy, actually, crazy enough, I'm a Jimmy guy. But when I put this list together the first time, he actually wasn't on the list at all. I totally forgot about him. And then I had to go and rework everything to put him back on there. I'm a little low on him coming into this year because I think it could be weird with the contract and all that. His age, he almost never plays in the regular season, but he's still maybe the best playoff guy in the league at this point. And of course, he wasn't out there last year in the playoffs. So that's why he takes a big drop here. So for Jalen, phenomenal year, brilliant in the playoffs, and the 2 MVP awards speak for themselves. I thought he took a nice step defensively this year too. Mid-range, one of the better mid-range guys in the league. And I love his ability to crack open elite post defense. I think that's what's most valuable for the Celtics. And he really found his role playing for the Celtics too. And if you want to rank him higher, I think the argument would be he's able to play alongside Tatum and thrive alongside Tatum, where Tatum's being the one at such a high level, and maybe a higher level than anyone else in this class of guys would be capable of. But there's still a lot of these other guys leading their teams as the one. There's still the free throw thing, 3-point shooting thing with him that I think have to improve into this year. And as great as he was defensively last year, I want to see him do it again. And I don't think it's a knock the guys who are in front of him. Booker, another great year last year. I don't think any of the problems in Phoenix are his. And he has, in my mind, to shoulder the load of running that team as the facilitator, as a guy who still has to score a ton of points. Brown may be a better defender than him, but Booker's taken some steps there. Kawhi, it's all about health, but if Kawhi's healthy and Kawhi, he's ahead of Jalen. LeBron, I'm actually taking LeBron probably further down this list than most people would. Defense, availability. He was tremendous last year, though, and so great inside the arc and outside the arc, too, that I think it's actually going to be pretty tough for LeBron to repeat what he did last year. He was unreal efficiency-wise. So, yeah, he just had a better year than Jalen. Tyrese, probably the one people are going to have the biggest problem with here. I'm way higher on Tyrese than maybe almost anyone. I think he's an engine, runs that team that's just this offense that's on par with anybody's. Right there with the Celtics is the best in the league last year. And so much of it is just his passing, his shooting ability. He got hurt midway through last year, and the shooting kind of fell off the map after that. And defensively, he leaves a lot to be desired there too. So it's tough. Again, Jalen's the 2 on the Celtics. Tyrese is doing everything for Indy. It's tough to compare those guys. Edwards, again, I'm a little lower on him probably than most people are going into this year. Still think he has some things to clean up. And he and Jalen are actually pretty comparable players. Anthony Edwards isn't always the point of attack guy there in Minnesota. So I think he and Brown are actually probably in like the same area right now, more than most people would think, given the Edwards hype. Mitchell, I wanted to make a statement about Mitchell. He was the best player the Celtics, or the most dangerous player the Celtics saw in their run. When he's out there, he's just blowing up the rim, whether it's dunking, whether it's pulling up for a ton of threes. He's a good facilitator. Not a bad defender either. I love his game, and he just powers that Cavs offense that has a lot of weak points in it. So hard to guard. I think when he's healthy, and he wasn't super healthy last year, he's an all-NBA guy. And then Brunson, who, again, probably a little lower on than most here, but I think it's going to be tough for him to repeat what he did last year. It was an incredible season. I actually think there's some parallels to the Isaiah year that he had in Boston. Can he repeat it again? Probably has to take a step back scoring-wise to make it work with a bunch of other guys who are fitting into that lineup now. So if he can maintain top 10 status, and he was top 10 last year, I'd say super impressive at his stature, how far he's had to climb up this list through his career. I think 11's more than fair for him. And he was a top 5 MVP guy last year. So I don't know. Who would you put Jalen over here if you had to move him up?
Everybody other than Jalen Brunson, I think, at this point.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, listen, what else do we want from him? Like he literally just led the Celtics to a championship. I mean, he was genuinely, he did everything. He did everything well. I feel like defensively, honestly, I'm starting to think that his performance was underrated defensively, what he was able to do throughout that run. And then offensively, I mean, I'd have to look at the efficiency numbers because I do think he takes a big hit with the free throws. But I mean, yeah, I think you have to put him above Kawhi, I don't think should be here because of the injuries, or if we're talking injuries for Porzingis and everybody else gets a knock, like Kawhi can't be number 16. He hasn't, he's just, you can't.
How low should he drop?
30s.
Wow.
I love Kawhi. I'm just looking at I hate to knock guys for injuries, but it's like he's not available, right? He's consistently not available. It's not a one-off thing. It's a very specific thing that we know is going to continue being an issue in the future. I mean, he literally just wasn't able to play in the Olympics, right? So, Kawhi, I don't think you can have him above Jaylen Brown. I don't think you can have Devin Booker. Like, I want to see Devin Booker do what Jaylen Brown just did, it's at a certain point, like, you have to go off of what they gave us. And Halliburton, I love Halliburton. I love him as a player. I think he's great. I think he's a beautiful passer. I also felt like when he got hurt in the playoffs, there wasn't a substantial drop off with that team. Like, it almost felt like they didn't have a defender to exploit as much, the Celtics. And so he has to get knocked a little bit for that. But all those guys I would comfortably move down. Brunson is the one that I think has to, honestly, I don't know, I have to look at your top 10, but I think Brunson has to be a top 10 player, just based off what we saw. I thought he was playing at an MVP caliber level for stretches, and I expect him to be an MVP candidate this year. That's my prediction. But yeah,
if he
Kawhi,
is,
Booker,
wow, he's an all-timer if he can keep that up.
I feel like Halliburton's as a concept, like you're saying Halliburton because I think what his ceiling might be, right? But we're not talking ceilings here. Like right now, Jaylen Brown has shown us more. He's accomplished more. I think that it has to go. You have to go off of that. So that's my case for Jaylen Brown. And obviously these are all very talented players. So it's no shame being in the top 20 players in the world, but I think Jaylen Brown has to be a little bit higher than that. Like you win Finals MVP, and the way that he did it too. He won Finals MVP when Jason Tatum was. I think the big knock on him is that he's plays alongside another superstar, right? That's the idea.
Yep. I think some of these other guys are more frontmen on their team, but if you want to rank Edwards a little lower here, more alongside him, Booker, again, he's down at 17 right next to Brown. Not saying Booker's a million times better than him because obviously he's got KD and all the rest there. But he's driven his team to the finals in the past, and I think he's been super consistent in terms of his output. So it's tough. So many of these guys are so close. And that brings us to the top 10. I went Davis over Brunson. Davis was just out of this world. Even during some of the Olympic stretches we saw him, I still think he's one of the best defenders in the world, and he's putting up 24 and 12 or whatever he does. I think he's so impressive at this stage, despite all the injuries he's gone through. Curry, Durant, those guys are in very similar places, so old at this point, but they're still keeping up out of this world production, which we saw in the Olympics too from those guys. I'll give Tatum the benefit of the doubt over them. As you see, he's here at 5. Just based on their ages, the trajectory, the defense certainly here too that Tatum has shown. But those two are still much more consistent and dominant offensive forces than what we've seen from Tatum here. I think Tatum gets them, and I do buy into the width of his impact. So I was pretty generous to Tatum here. I feel like putting him at 5. And that's, when he's at his peak, when he's playing at the level he can and the level I expect him to, I think he's squarely the 5th best player in the league. Some would argue Embiid over him. Embiid was the MVP the last 2 years before the injuries, and even on one leg, I still thought he played out of this world last year. But Tatum has beaten him so many times, and Embiid's fallen so flat in the playoffs that Tatum gets the nod over him in my mind. And yes, I'm going 7 for Wembanyama. He's going to win Defensive Player of the Year this year almost automatically if he does what he did last year at more minutes, more impact, more strength coming off the offseason. We just saw what he did against Team USA almost single-handedly, trying to drive them to a win there, France. And I think the offense is going to take a real step too. If he's hitting threes this year, Noah, he's going to be first team All-NBA. Everything else is there in my mind. There's some facilitating questions, and certainly the team around him isn't great, which I think hurts him. But after what we saw him do in his first season, trying to get his feet under him, trying to figure out the NBA, probably being a little skinny, all that stuff. I mean, he put up 21, 10, 4 assists, a steal a game, 3.6 blocks per game. And per 36, he was 26, 13, 5 with 4 blocks a game. And that's shooting 32% from 3. If that's 33, 35, 37, forget about it. He's going to be number 1 soon on this list. And this year, I think he's going to get up to 7. And then you got your Shea, Luka, Giannis, Jokic, who were the bona fide MVP candidates last year. Thoughts?
My biggest one is I think just Luka's too high. I think you just have to take into account defensively the liability that he is. And, most of these other stars in that position wouldn't have allowed the Celtics to go up 3-0. I thought that his defense was like a major reason why that happened. And that has to be, 50% of the game, right? So if we preach that, I think he's just ranked too high on here. Wemby startled me a little. I didn't expect him to be a ranked 7th, just because he was on such a massively losing team last year that you think a top 7 guy almost but single-handedly could make that record be better. But he really had an abysmal cast around him, and I don't think they set him up for success. So it's hard to fault him. Was a little surprised Anthony Davis. Honestly, I'm really feeling clouded by the Olympics right now, because even just seeing Steph and Durant, I'm like, those are the 2 best players in the world. Like, what are we doing here? Because they were so, those 2 and LeBron really looked like the 3 best players, right? And so it's hard to reckon like the Steph that we just saw take over and essentially win Olympic gold, and a Steph that we know is going to be on the decline next year. So you probably have those 2 in the right spot. I still think Wemby's a little high. I don't know. He looked great in the Olympics. He had some big moments, but we haven't seen him be able to be like a guy willing his team to victory in the NBA yet. So
I'm anticipating a real leap at 21 with Chris Paul and with just the comfort of knowing what he was able to do last year and going out and doing it. I think his confidence is at a high level right now, and a lot of it is going to be the shooting. If it's there, he's on this level. If it's not, he's probably more in the teens or high 20s. So he's definitely top 25. There's no doubt about that right now to me, but I'm projecting a massive leap for Wembanyama this year. And already led the league in blocks, already was, 2nd last year in Defensive Player of the Year? So the defense is there at this level. Now is the offense going to follow? I thought he already did a lot in limited minutes last year on offense too. So we'll see. It's a high bar. It's going to be tough to reach this echelon, and the team's still pretty shaky. But I think he can do it, especially as some of these other guys age here and maybe deal with injuries and some other stuff. I hope he continues to stay healthy too with that body.
Yeah.
That's still the big concern here. But Noa Dalzell, thanks for stopping by. We'll talk a little bit longer here and tell you about one of our sponsors, but Noah's got to run. Check out her work on sbnation.com and the You Got Boston podcast multiple times a week here on CLNS Media. Thanks, Noah.
Thanks, Bobby.
All right. So that is our top 100. I want to give a shout out to one of our other sponsors, and then I have some final thoughts I want to get to here for our live edition of the show this week. Let's give a shout out to one of my favorites here, HelloFresh. HelloFresh, you know them, you love them. And if you've been a subscriber in the past, you know that they're giving you the food that you need to get through your day when you want it, how you want it, and making it easy for you to prepare on your own and a little fun too. It's America's #1 meal kit. Why? You get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. We know home cooked meals are so much better for you, make you feel good, and a lot of times, better for you than what you're getting out. So if you don't have time to pull it off, that's why a lot of people don't go this route. HelloFresh handles all the planning, shopping, and most of the prep. It's prepackaged ingredients, laid out instructions, no more endless recipe searching or spending money on a whole jar of spices for only a pinch. With HelloFresh, everything you need to make delicious meals comes right to your door, pre-portioned and fresh. Plus, step-by-step recipe cards to make cooking simple. Ever-changing menu. They're always updating it based on the season. I'm sure they're going to have some fall recipes coming your way soon. Vegetarian, family-friendly, fit and wholesome, and quick and easy. A lot of people love that one. With summer in the rearview mirror and busier days ahead, now's the perfect time to save time and money when it comes to your dinner routine. Can't recommend HelloFresh enough. Skip the meal planning and grocery store lines. Cut down on food waste with their doorstep delivery and pre-measured ingredients. So for free breakfast for life with your subscription, as long as you have your subscription, go to HelloFresh.com/freegarden. That's FREEGARDEN. One free breakfast item per box while subscription's active. That's free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/freegarden. That's HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. So, few notes this week. Not a ton going on still. I'm thinking we'll maybe get some stuff to react to next week here. And then 2 weeks from now or so, give or take, we're going to get into training camp. A lot of preview material for the season too. I'm starting to think about what kind of questions we have with this team, how things are going to stack up. There's not a ton of concerns. I think a lot of it's going to be the teams around the NBA as they try to compete with Boston here. And Joe Mazzulla talked a little bit about that. He went on with John Karalis over on the Locked On Celtics podcast. Great interview. Definitely recommend it. And the big thing he said here was that they're going to have a target on their back. He's embracing that. And the big quote from the interview was he wants to see the red dot, between their eyes. And he's embracing the fact that they're going to be the hunted team this year. I think they've talked about that over the last couple of years in different spots, more so when they've disappointed. And I find this talk from him, from Brad Stevens, who was emphasizing with the Globe that it's going to be hard this year. It's going to be harder than last year. Mentally preparing this team for the hangover effect. There's going to be no surprise when teams are giving their best effort against the Celtics. There's obviously a number of teams, the Knicks included, as we talked about today, who built their rosters almost with the thinking of, how do we beat Boston? How do we defend these multiple wings? How do we have the defensive versatility we need to hold up against their mismatch attacking system on offense? There's no Porzingis as an outlet this year. That's obviously what we're going to talk about over and over and over again. How does it look without that there? But I think Joe, I think Brad are looking less at what do we need? What kind of system are we running here? What are the X's and O's we need to reach proficiency-wise to reach the finals and championship level again? and more what's the mentality they need to have to be able to stay consistent during the regular season, stay motivated during the regular season, because that's not going to be their focus regular season basketball next year, but you can't fall off the map. I think if they fell to the 2 seed or whatever, people wouldn't have a huge deal, but if you fell to like 3 or 4 off a hangover, that's not great. And that's going to set you up for a much harder road to the championship. One thing people always say, like, oh, they had the easiest road ever. You earn that by being the 1 seed to some degree, like they were. So interesting stuff there in the interview. I definitely would go check it out. Karalis did a good job there, but that was the thing that stood out to me. The latest one among the Celtics leadership brass to say, this is going to be a mentality thing this year. Teams are coming for us, all of that. So good interview there. Other thing, we've talked at length about the Lonnie Walker situation, again, coming in on a training camp deal here, high expectations for him. Is he going to make this roster? I still have questions about that, and there's been some reporting about that that's come out since, that he could be waived, could end up in Maine. And you look at what's gone on across the NBA here. Taylor Horton-Tucker just signed an exhibit deal with Chicago. Guys are starting to settle for that. And O'Shea Brissett, who went on with his Brissy TV there on YouTube and started to allude to the fact that that could be it for him here with Boston. And not that Lonnie Walker's signing precludes him from returning here, but it does make that room filled in training camp. They have 20 guys signed out of 21. It's going to be tough to get back into the mix and play consistently here and have a guarantee to make the roster. You look around the league right now, most teams have 14 guys signed. Are many of them going to use all 15 spots? Probably not. Especially the taxpayers like Boston, you save $12 million, give or take, by not filling 15 for the time being. And that's something where you're spending as much as you are here to have this contending team. You probably don't need a luxury on the backside of the roster at 15 like Walker. And so if he blows you away, if he's super consistent, if he's effective and has all the habits that they're looking for here, again, I think the Celtics have emphasized like having the right personalities in the room, having guys who are committed to roles, having guys who defend, which Walker struggled with to some degree here. I'm still on the lower side of Walker, and I know Noah didn't have the time to stick around here. We talked about it a little bit in our video down in Providence a couple days ago. There's some holes in his game, and he's bounced around teams now, still on the young side of things, and he shot well enough last year to project that he's going in the right direction here. But the defensive numbers were so bad, in and out of things in terms of like his involvement in the rotation in Brooklyn. Similar deal in LA. The highs were high, the lows weren't great. He's a streaky player, guy who's still trying to figure it out to some degree, it feels like here. So it's no mistake teams across the league, not just the Celtics or whoever it might be here, didn't want to go guaranteed on him. They're younger guys. They're younger prospects. There are guys who haven't had the opportunity he's had to figure it out yet. And so do you need him? I think that's what Brad has talked about. They don't need him right now. It'd be cool to have. It'd be nice if he could figure it out here in Boston. And that's, the reason they're bringing him in the camp and all that is that there's enough talent here to suggest that in the right environment, with the right coaching, with the patience, and that's going to be the big thing for him, because we haven't heard a lot from him, but a lot of it's going to be, I'm going to prove people wrong. I'm going to show people what I'm made of. For Walker, I think it's going to be going back to square one. And I know that sounds crazy, but this might be what it takes for him to make it in Boston. Maybe another team sees what he does in the preseason or whatever and says, here's a role, here's a minimum. Can he take a step back to Maine for at least a couple months, have a role there, show consistent winning habits, grow defensively? I think Maine's done a good job with that. Again, sounds crazy, Going to have to take a big step back money-wise and all that. But that's what it's going to take, in my mind, for him to make it here in Boston. He's not just going to sit on the bench every day and develop that in practice when they have practice and the rare opportunities where he's able to step into the lineup. It's going to happen through taking a serious step back, I think. And, it sounds like such a staggering step back for a guy with his name and what he's done in different spots in his career. But again, multiple teams have moved on from him. The whole NBA, save for Boston, didn't give him a minimum contract, a guarantee to make a roster here at this point. So it might be for the best with him. And if he can accept that, you might have a really good story here of a guy who turns it around completely and becomes a new player, a more well-rounded and consistent player than what we saw, with certainly some big flashes, but no staying power in his last 3 teams. And yeah, he started in San Antonio, went to LA and had a big role on that team in spots. Brooklyn last year had a great season, and still, no one wanted to commit to him. So there's more to it here, obviously, than the 3-point percentage and, everything that stands out from what he did last year and in recent spots. So I'm interested to see how it goes, as we find out more about, what led him to this Exhibit 10 contract and what he's aspiring to do being in Boston, because obviously he knows might not make the team, could end up in Maine. I think it does say something about his acceptance of that maybe he's able to embrace a developmental path at this point in his career, because I still think he's young enough to make some real strides here. So that's our show for today. The rest of the list will be up on CLNS Media shortly. Some quick blurbs on why I rank guys where I did in the top 100. Thanks for joining us here today. Again, show some love to our sponsors here at the Garden Report, Prize Picks. Use that code CLNS. Put some fantasy teams together for this weekend. If you don't have a fantasy team, this is a great way to do it and win some money too. Use that code CLNS. Get $50 instantly by playing $5 over on Prize Picks. Go to Game Time. You want to go to a football game this weekend or any event going on as the summer comes to a close here. Use CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Nutrafol. Get $10 off your first month subscription. Specialized preventative hair loss treatment over there. Free shipping as well, which is big. Go to Nutrafol.com and use the code GARDEN. And HelloFresh, my favorite, HelloFresh.com/freegarden. 1 free breakfast item per box while your subscription's active. I'm Bobby Manning. This has been the Garden Report. And we will talk to you again next week as we start previewing this season. I think it's going to be preview season when we get back here after the weekend. Enjoy yours. Enjoy football. Hoping for a 2-0 start for Syracuse, and we'll see what the Patriots show you there. I'm not feeling great about it, but there'll be great coverage over on Patriots Press Pass, so go subscribe there as well. And that's it for our show here. We will talk to you next week.
Wait, Amit's got an outro for us, I think.
No, he doesn't.
He said he was going to work on an outro.
He had a phenomenal game.
Phenomenal.
Forfeit's out. I think it's an auction. That did not sound like a chair.
It was a freaking chair. It does sound like a chair.